Hello and welcome to Take Charge Tuesday. It is a wonderful Tuesday afternoon. I won't say evening because the sun is still shining so brightly and it's making me very happy. Uh, but it is Tuesday and it is time for us to have our weekly conversation all about marketing. And today we're going to be talking about marketing yourself and marketing yourself in an effective and efficient manner, specifically as it relates to marketing yourself for telling a good personal story. So I am here with you. I am still trying to figure out the lighting situation. So give me a little bit of grace as it takes me probably a few tries at Take Charge Tuesday to get this lighting thing right. But I will get it right. I will get it right. So today I want to talk about the whole concept of making the personal professional. So often I have people who talk to me or talk with me or, want to have conversations all about their marketing and they're confused and like very confused because they want to do effective marketing for themselves. They want to get themselves out there and maybe um, the confusion is coming in where they are maybe working a job right now that doesn't exactly fit with what it is that they want to be doing going forward. So the current job doesn't really fit with the whole, broader scope of things. And so like it doesn't fit with where they're trying to go and or maybe they've had some sort of career break or other any number of things. And I'll use myself as an example because I have not always been a marketer and I didn't go to school for marketing. So for anyone who knows my story, I went to school for political science and I have multiple degrees in political science. Matter of fact, I've went to several schools for political science. And then in the end, I found a passion and a calling, not in teaching political science, but in teaching digital marketing. And that's really how I came to do what I'm doing now. But when I first got started, I was challenged. I had a big challenge of the vast majority of my resume was not related to marketing at all. And I had to figure out how to communicate a really good story about who I am and who I was as an entrepreneur that wasn't necessarily tied to what I had been doing for the past 10 years of my adult career. So I started my business at the end of my 20s, and I had been working and was still at that time working on a PhD. And so just a lot of years, lots and lots of years dedicated to an education that was in a completely different subject area. Now, I personally have a tendency towards not wanting to let that sort of thing like derail me, right? So some people get really kind of married to the idea that if they aren't in the field that they got their degree in, that they really shouldn't talk about it, or any sort of things like that. And I don't believe in that. I think that you should talk about your career. You should talk about whatever it is you're doing as it relates to your entrepreneurship, and in a way, vice versa. So same thing in the other direction. Mostly because I think it helps you. I think it doesn't do anything but help you. But it has to be approached in a way that is going to be comfortable for you as the entrepreneur, the person who is having these conversations with people, and in a way that won't, for those of you who are concerned about that whole like potentially getting yourself in trouble and all that other stuff with the types of employment that you have, you also do need to be conscious of how you're speaking about your work as it relates to what you do for your, for your entrepreneurship or for your side gig or whatever it is you're doing. So let's talk about the defining yourself part of building a professional brand and doing so by taking that personal aspect and kind of turning it into something that is makes sense for the people who are going to be seeing you and your environment, your business environment, your entrepreneurial environment. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to identify what it is you want to accomplish. So a brand has a job, and oftentimes we forget that because we're consuming brands, we're not producing them. And when you're producing a brand, you have to think about what it is that you want this brand to accomplish for yourself. What is the job that this brand is meant to be doing? And when you think through that, like, is your professional brand to help you get a different job than the one that you have? Is your professional brand meant to launch you into a new space? Like, you're going to be going off and starting your life as a full-time entrepreneur? What is your professional brand meant to do? Is your professional brand meant to build credibility? So are you building credibility while maybe working a job that is related? If any of those things are true, like, you have to figure out what it is, that you want your brand to be doing. Because if you don't know, first things first, what it is you're trying to accomplish, whatever we do won't matter. So I feel like you often see this on platforms like Instagram, which is where, when I do speak to people about this, often they are talking about, oh, I want my Instagram to be a certain way. Like, they want it to have a certain aesthetic. They want it to have a vibe. They want it to be a certain way. And I always ask, why? Why? What is the goal? What is it that you wanted to accomplish? Because a lot of times when people are getting started on Instagram and other platforms with creating, or they are like, oh, I only want to be on Instagram. I don't want to be on, LinkedIn, or I don't want to be on Facebook. I just want to be on Instagram. And my question is, what is the purpose of it? Because often the reason why should determine, or not often, every time, your reason why determines what platforms you're on, and it should determine what you're going to be posting. And so if you're developing a professional brand, the question is, why are you developing that brand? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What is it that you want to do with this brand? And then from there, we can talk about which platforms you should be on, which kind of aesthetic you should be going after, if an aesthetic is even necessary, because depending on what it is your brand is trying to accomplish, maybe having an aesthetic isn't going to be useful, and it's just going to end up being time consuming and kind of wasteful. And so instead of being wasteful, figuring out what it is you want is going to help you to figure out what that looks like, right? What it looks like for you. So first things first is goals. What is it that you want to accomplish? The second thing I want you to think about is why you're different from other people in your space. So if you are, again, building a professional brand and you are trying to differentiate yourself for a reason, whatever that why is that we talked about before, then you're going to have to think through how what you offer is different from what other people offer. This is not to say that I think you need to be trying to physically offer something different from what other people are offering, but essentially the you-ness of your professional brand. This is why I'm talking about making your personal professional. That you part is what makes you unique. Now let's dive into that and figure out how to communicate all of that you to your audience in a way that is going to be compelling, right? So I said I was going to talk a little bit about my story for those of you who don't know. I was getting a PhD in political science before I started doing marketing. And when I first started doing marketing, I actually was doing it in a way, in a very real sense, I was doing it in order to go completely in the opposite direction of political science. So I was volunteering as an AmeriCorps Vista with a nonprofit organization locally here in Cleveland. And I just didn't want to do anything related to politics. Plus, I mean, when you're volunteering, you kind of get the jobs that they have available. And a lot of the jobs that they had during this time were related to marketing. And I was like, perfect. I know how to write. Because I had been educating and teaching and writing and doing, papers and theses and all those things. I'm like, I know how to write. I'm a very creative person. And I thought, okay, let me see if I can help using the natural skill sets that I have and the things that I've developed over the years in, teaching. And what I learned in that, like, wanting to help, what I learned was that I am really good at communicating complicated things in an easy and understandable fashion. And that was what actually kind of pulled me towards marketing more than anything else. Now, when I was making my transition from PhD candidate to full-time entrepreneur, often that was the story that I told. So that little story right there, where I was using my skill set as a, professional, writer in the academic world and writing for academic papers and doing those. I used that skill set along with some natural, I will say cultivated artistic talent that I had from, coming up from a childhood. And then my also training and ability to teach, all of those things kind of merged into doing digital marketing and then doing digital marketing education. That was the story that I was telling, because that was what truly made me unique, was that I was a very well educated person who happened to be young and excited about digital marketing, but also was able to translate that excitement about digital marketing into real results for people, because I was also really good at copywriting and things like that. So that was a very unique set of circumstances that only applied to me. And well, I'm sure, honestly, there is no circumstances that only apply to you, but they only apply to me and maybe a few other people. And because of that, I was able to take that story and really turn it into a brand for myself. I kind of became known as a person who had left a PhD program in order to start a business doing marketing. To this day, if you look up, there's like a Freshwater Cleveland article about me, and I think that's like the top thing it says in there is like, she left her PhD program in order to start doing this. And that became like my little differentiator. And so for you, you might want to think through, what is it that is something that is relatively unique, something that only you have. And for me, it was just my story. It wasn't that I didn't make any of that up. That happened to be true. And I honed my skill sets over the years to be more and more good at digital marketing. But I started out just being really good at writing and really fastidious about words and language and communicating complicated things in a simple manner. That was what like made me into a good marketer to start with. And then all the things that I've acquired since then are technical knowledge and application and skills developed over use of, using my innate abilities over years. And think about it that way, like, what is it that makes you unique? And then the last part is to craft that in, well, not the last part, but and the next part is to craft that into a story. So again, I have my little unique thing, which is that I was a PhD candidate who was transitioning into entrepreneurship and into marketing. And then from there, I have actually have several stories that I tell people around that transition. And those stories are there to illuminate the difference between me and other people, but also to make me memorable and to make my story memorable to those people. So I have, again, various stories I tell around that time in my life, about that time in my life where I was making the transition and what it looked like and how and why and all those things. And I give those stories to different audiences based on essentially who they are and what it is that they need to know in order to help me get what I need to get out of that relationship, right? Not in a like quid pro quo reciprocal way, but in order for anyone to get what they want out of any relationship, someone has to remember you. So in a way of being memorable. So if you're going to have a really good professional brand, you need it to be memorable, and the best way to be memorable is to tell a really good story. And I encourage you to make sure that your story is 100% true, as much as humanly possible, and that your story is relevant to your audience. And so, like I said, I don't just have one story, I have several stories that I tell that are all about that time in my life and making the transition. And then I also have stories that I tell as I was making the transition from doing social media only, because I started out doing social media marketing, and then I made the transition to doing other types of marketing, and I tell a different story for that transition. And then when I started doing a lot of digital marketing education, I tell a different story for that transition. So thinking through who it is that you're talking to, what information they need to know and why they need to know it, and then coming up with a set of really good stories that are going to make sense to the audience that you're talking to. So having a professional brand is not, again, about a color scheme or an aesthetic. It is really about crafting a really good story that is going to help people to understand who you are and how they can help you. And if you are doing a good job at making that story sing, then it'll be really easy for people to go, oh, I know someone who can help you because this, and that. And that is what we want. We want to have a set of advocates out there in the world who are able to help us because they are really, really clear on what our story is and what our goals are because we're communicating those really well. And then lastly, you want to like merge all of these things into a really good single statement. So again, now I talked about communicating it verbally. When you're communicating it verbally, it doesn't have to be into a single statement. It can be as many different statements as you need to make in order to help someone understand who you are and what it is you're trying to accomplish, and or to tailor it to specific audiences. All of those things are real. Absolutely. But then we do live in a digital age, right? So we live in an era of digital marketing, and I want you to have a way to communicate all of those things and distill them down into a single message that could be used in a social media post, or a single message that can be used as your headline on LinkedIn, or a single message that can be put in your profile on Instagram. Because those kind of single one sentence or 1.5 sentence messages or 240 characters, however long you have, those little moments where you're sharing a very specific sentence online that someone is reading without you explaining it, those happen all the time. They're happening constantly. Sometimes they're happening in the comment section where someone says something very witty and you need to respond, but you don't have the language exactly to like explain why your response is valid and who you are. Not that, again, we are all valid as humans, but your response may be very applicable, but you don't have that little thing, just that little thing that's merging, like I said, that personal with the professional in a way that's going to help them go, oh, that's why she's the person I should be listening to, or that's why he's the person I should be listening to. So you want to take all the things I've been talking about and kind of tie them up into a bow so that you can present it in a nice, neat little package to people when it's necessary. And so that you can use it in your profile, in your bio, in your headline on all the different platforms, so that when someone reads that one little sentence and that 250 character moment, when they consume that, they can say, ah, I know who she is, I know who he is, and I understand what it is that they want. I understand where they came from, and I understand who their potential customer is. And then that way, those people who may or may not know you can become perfect advocates for you. And if you don't think that this matters, I can tell you to this day, that is why I'm here. Is that when I was early on, I was not afraid to tell people the truth, which was that I was getting a PhD. And no, getting a PhD is not a universally good thing. And so this is not like, oh, I had people who looked at me when I said I was getting a PhD. I have had, especially because I was relatively young when I started, I went straight into graduate school out of undergrad. And so I definitely had some people who gave me all sorts of side eye for going straight into graduate school after undergrad because they didn't think I knew anything. They were right. And then I had people who gave me side eyes for getting political science degrees. And I gave people who gave me side eye for doing volunteer work at a nonprofit while I was working on a PhD, and people who gave me a side eye for starting a business while I was working on a PhD. There are going to be people who look at you sideways for any number of reasons. So I'm not saying that, when you're telling these stories that giving that information or wrapping it in a bow and doing all those things is going to make you above reproach. Not even close. What I am saying though is that it will give you a firm enough foundation to stand on so that when you're putting your professional brand out into the world, so that when you're putting your personal story into a professional package and then handing it to someone, you will feel solid in what it is that you're communicating. You won't have a ton of ums and ahs and, well, that's not that important. And, oh, I don't talk about that. You won't have those moments, because those moments oddly enough, the times where I did that, where I was like, oh, well, I'm getting a PhD, but I don't really want to talk about it, they just make me look invalid, actually. So they do the opposite of what you think. Instead of making people feel more comfortable, they make people feel less comfortable. And so if you are working a day job somewhere and you're starting a side hustle and you're doing a thing, do not be afraid to tell people about it. Please don't be afraid to tell people about it. The only circumstance under which I don't want you telling people about it is if it's going to risk your job. So if you have a job in a specific space, and this does happen, where you have developed an expertise in a workplace and you are like, man, I could take this expertise on the road, and you are kind of farming yourself out on the side, and maybe it's against your terms of service at work, then keep that to yourself. But you understand where I'm going. Otherwise, if it is unrelated and there is no risk of harm to you or anyone else, tell your story and tell it without fear. Because if you don't tell your story without fear, if you tell it with trepidation, you tell it and you're all like timid about it, and I don't know if people are going to want to hear this. If you're telling your story like that, people aren't going to want to hear it. And it's going to make it a lot harder for you to communicate the fact that your personal story does have a professional wrap. Like, it is a part of an entire professional you. So consider that. Hopefully, this was useful information to you. And if you want more, if you actually want to practice writing a really good professional brand statement, if you want to talk about the idea of colors and the idea of what it does mean to have a brand and not just to have a really good story, because a story is a part of a brand, but it's not the whole thing. If you want that conversation, I would love for you to join me in the workshop that is starting in 8 minutes. And I have provided that information in the description of this video. So in the description / caption for this video, if you want to join me, I would love to see you there. Starts at 6 p.m. and Eastern time. So if you're watching this in any other time zone, I guess it's still starting like in 8 minutes. So it doesn't really matter because I'm live right now. But if you want, go ahead, click the link and join us. And I would love to see you there, where we can really have a great conversation all about developing a professional brand from your personal career story. With that, I will see you next week. I have already noted, actually, I won't see you next week. I will have a workshop next week, but I will not have Take Charge Tuesday next week. Y'all, the schedule is the schedule. But I will be having a workshop, and it will be at 7 next week instead of at 6 like normal. So either way, have a fantastic week, and I will see you later.